parties. Tajikistan has a responsible attitude to its commitments in the area of human rights. In its short period of independence, we have managed to adopt a number of instruments in this area. We have, for instance, adopted international documents as well as instituted domestic reforms. We have national human rights monitoring and implementation mechanisms. The government of Tajikistan continues to hold constructive dialogue with all international organizations, including with the UN and OSCE structures, and to improve its legislation and consistently apply international legal acts in Tajikistan's internal legislation. However, the process of democratization requires a comprehensive approach and takes time. We cannot only certainly export or import institutions. We must ensure the rights and freedoms of our citizens and social order, as well as our territorial sovereignty. This requires the acceptance of certain limitations. Our country is facing regional and international security issues, including fighting terrorism, extremism, narco-trafficking, and other challenges. So measures need to be taken in the framework of national and international law. However, at times there are interpretations of such measures as limiting human rights, and there are attempts to justify extremism. We are concerned about the damage to the solid reputation of international organizations when this occurs. We must focus on cooperation among participating states of the OSCE so that they may help each other in protecting human rights and preventing human rights violations, and to issue constructive recommendations and not to be limited to listing current problems. We are trying to formulate new mechanisms in order to render our activity more effective. These recommendations must be concrete, they must be implementable, and they must be in keeping with OSCE values. We are certain that our dialogue will help us all to institute our commitments to the OSCE, including Tajikistan's commitments in the area of human rights. I'd like once again to thank the OSCE for having organized this meeting and to assure you that we will take all necessary steps in order to fulfill our commitments in Tajikistan. Thank you.
Of Tajikistan. With this statement, we are at the end of the delegations who wanted to take the floor in this session. But, of course, 4 delegations issued the request to use their right of reply. I would ask you to really strictly limit that to 1 minute in order that we can also respect, of course, the rules we have given ourselves to finish probably in time. The 4 delegations are Turkey, Azerbaijan, Hungary, and Ukraine. And for the first, I will give the floor to the Turkish delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Very briefly, in reply to Mr. Roth during the debate, first of all, let me stress that we fully agree with the statements concerning the danger posed by Islamophobia and the demonization of Muslims. My reply isn't about that. I object to the reference made by him during the debate to the alleged fears shared by President Erdogan and the PKK. This, in our view, was a very misguided and inaccurate remark. We must stress that it is important to distinguish between PKK terrorism and the wider phenomenon of the legitimate demands of our citizens of Kurdish origin in Turkey. Turkey is fighting PKK terrorism, nothing more and nothing less. Counterterrorism measures in this regard target those and only those who perpetrate or support PKK terrorism. Citizens of Kurdish origin are an integral part of our nation and actively take part in local administrations, municipalities, in parliament, and in the government as elected representatives of those bodies. So in this connection, any presentation of counterterrorism operations in Turkey as acts against our citizens of Kurdish origin is biased and can only serve the PKK's propaganda purposes, and 10 seconds in reply to my Armenian colleague and his reference to the tragic events of 1915. I don't need to be long about this. Our views are well known, our archives are open, our proposal for a joint historical commission remains valid. There is simply no case for genocide, which is a very narrowly defined legal term and needs to be proven before and established by a competent court. We hope that at one point the Armenian side will abandon their one-sided rhetoric and join us in our quest for truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Turkey, now one more delegation showed up, but can I now list, okay, with that, I have it listed. Can I now close the list of right to reply? Thank you. Next delegation to reply is Azerbaijan, followed by Hungary.
Thank you. And in connection with the statements made by EU on behalf of aligned countries and US, our delegation would like to state that we will convey the consent to the capital. And as I reject the consent of this, and we understand there is a lack of understanding on the priorities of the foreign and domestic of the government of Azerbaijan, as well as to the processes taken out in our region on the situation in the run-up to the referendum. Let me inform you that the opposition parties conducted a rally and freely exercised their right on peaceful assembly. So thus they made their voice heard. On the Khadija Ismailova, her imprisonment was substituted to the release on probation by the decision of the relevant court, and there are certain procedures to follow, and travel ban is one of it, and we are not going to comment on this one. Nevertheless, while the challenges remain everywhere, this focus on Azerbaijan is just indication of a selective approach, and the government, the leadership, and people chosen the path of development would take the issue of the human rights seriously, and we're planning to continue on that for the benefit of us and the wider region. And shortly, in response to the delegation of Armenia, well, actually, we do not accept any criticism on behalf of this delegation as far as their troops remain on the territories of Azerbaijan, and their actions has been recognized and defined by the international community as occupation. And if this delegation is sincere in his statement, we'll just invite to withdrawal forces and to let Azerbaijani community also to return, and thus to create an opportunity for the peaceful coexistence of two communities in that region of Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you, Azerbaijan. Next delegation for right to reply is Hungary, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's going to be impossible for me to respond in 1 minute, but I will try. I was happy to hear a reference to 56 Hungarian refugees, many of whom I'm honored to know, and their enormous contribution to societies that were generous to receive them. Their behavior, solemn resolution of their situation, compliance with rules of transit and receiving countries, and patience while waiting for their fate to turn for the better is still, after 60 years, an outstanding example. I would like to take this opportunity and address a few remarks that were made during the opening roundtable. If we dilute the difference by insensitive statements between, on one hand, countries that violate fundamental human rights, and on the other hand, democracies that took the arduous work to screen, explain, and harmonize their respective policies with their European partners, we not only establish double standards, but we also disrespect the importance of European institutions whose mandate is to evaluate such policies. We put these debates behind us by standing up for our decisions and policies and making adjustments as a result of the process. Hungary has fulfilled its obligation as a European democracy in concert with other European democracies and democratic institutions. Countries that may express a more conservative outlook on the world yet fully comply with every democratic requirement there is deserve the same uncompromised respect for their democratic policies. European citizens, just as countries, look at probably 90% of current issues in a similar way, finding common ground very easily. There is a number of issues, though, that are the center of public interest currently, which represent a small but important minority of debates. Addressing these issues in an open and democratic manner is essential. Labeling and name-calling countries and politicians who champion these debates is counterproductive and diverts our efforts from addressing them democratically and in their entirety. Our goal and obligation with these issues and debates is doublefold. We stand up for the rights and responsibilities of individual countries to address them, yet at the same time, we are just as well committed that the widest possible breadth of the European public is aware of them and has the right and opportunity to express their views in the process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks to the Ambassador of Hungary. Next delegation is Ukraine, followed by Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to respond to the statement of the Russian delegation with a reference to what was called an internal armed conflict in Ukraine. In this connection, I wish to reiterate what has been earlier proved by abundant factual evidence and findings, that the conflict of the last 2 years on Ukrainian territory is not internal, but a product of an armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and the use of force by Russia against Ukraine. The resolution of the conflict requires that Russia implements the commitments it has undertaken and returns to the tenets of international law, in particular in relation to respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the OSCE participating states, which has not, unfortunately, yet happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I have here the two last delegations now for right of reply. Poland, followed by Armenia, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. My country was mentioned a few times in the panel discussion on the state of democracy in the participating states. So I feel obliged to respond to some of the comments which I found to some extent unjustified. There were a couple of comments regarding the deficiencies in democratic standards, including division of powers, check and balance, and specifically the Constitutional Court reform. With regard to the reform, please let me remind that the amendments to the law on Constitutional Court have in no way infringed upon democratic standards, rule of law, or human rights. The Polish government is interested in the normalization of the situation and around the Constitutional Tribunal, as it acknowledges crucial role within the Polish constitutional system. The manifestation of this will is in the fact the adoption of the July 22nd of the new law on Constitutional Code, which in many aspects implements the recommendation of the Venice Commission. Finally, the Polish authorities express on numerous instances their appreciation for the cooperation with the Council of Europe and expertise of the Venice Commission, as well as for open and constructive dialogue. The Venice Commission, upon the invitation of the Polish authorities, has visited Poland several times. It is important indeed that the respective international organization bodies stand ready to offer their expertise and advice for the governments in the process of creating or amending their law. However, it is also important in assisting states in a variety of issues to form all opinions in an objective manner and taking into account all verifiable facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now the very last, of course, Armenia and Russian Federation. And of course, with respect to our ambassador, translators, of course, certainly we will prolong the break so that, of course, we will begin later what we have now worked longer. We will begin it later in the working session number 1. And the technical arrangements in the end will be read only without translation, only in English. So please, two more very brief statements by Armenia and the Russian Federation, and then we close with this session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to respond to my distinguished Turkish colleague. We understand that the Turkish delegation is bound by duty of denial. We are also bound by another duty of memory. And we remember, every time Turkish delegates refer that the survival of Turkish state is at stake, we remember that those who perpetrate Armenian genocide also refer to some existential threats. In our view, duty of memory is also useful for Turkish society, including its national minorities, to which Turkish delegate made excessive references today. I thank you.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Armenia and now the delegation of the Russian Federation as the last right to reply.
Thank you, Director. Very briefly, as we have already said several times, both the Russian Federation and other members of the international community, the key to the settlement of the internal conflict in the southeast of Ukraine is the strict implementation of all Minsk package provisions and not measures which are taken on an arbitrary basis by Kiev. We call on our Ukrainian partners in the OSCE to not seek pretexts for not implementing their obligations, but to strictly comply with all provisions in the Minsk Agreement.
We will now, of course, with some very brief but only read in English, have some technical arrangements, but let me thank all of you first of all for this opening session. We will have ample opportunity to discuss all the questions now raised in the many working sessions, over 16 working sessions, which we will have in the next 2 weeks. The first one will, of course, now begin in the afternoon with a special overview from ODIHR's activities, 3:15. But also all the other issues will be discussed, and they will be discussed with representatives of civil society, whom I actively invite to do that. We thank you for attending this opening session, and before I close it formally, I hand over for some technical remarks in English only by ODIHR's first Deputy Director, Katarzyna Jaroszewicz-Varga.
I will just take literally 1 minute because of time. You have all the technical information in your meeting manuals that has been distributed, but I wanted to bring to your attention one very important thing, which is the speakers list. The speakers list will be open 1 hour prior to the upcoming session, to each session. So in this case, it will open at 2 o'clock. And it will be limited to 50 speakers for the sake of time and the time of the interpreters. So the session, the speakers list might be closed before the beginning of the session should the limit be reached, and then a reserve list will be opened. But I also wanted to bring to your attention that speakers can only take the floor in the capacity in which they register, and only entities registered on the speakers list can be represented. We will allow as many speakers, the speakers as much time as possible given the length of the list, and we will announce this at the beginning of each session. And if possible, if you have written statements or written recommendations, please deliver them prior to the session to the documents desk so that the interpreters can have them before. They will not be distributed unless you specify otherwise. And on a positive and less technical note, let me also extend my invitation to the 25th anniversary reception held by ODIHR today at 8 o'clock. You have received the invitations, and the map and the address will be at the reception and the welcome desk for your information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and see you 3:15.